Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Operations of Impact, how to build systems that reflect your values. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a director of high growth impact entrepreneurs and head of sponsorships at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who don't know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit improving access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to help entrepreneurs fuel prosperity, no matter where your journey begins. Be sure to check out those links and resources shared in the chat. Now, we're going to launch a few polls to take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of you are doing today. We use this information to guide the programs and resources we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. If there are specific topics or challenges you'd like us to create resources for, feel free to share them in the chat. Couple of more housekeeping items. And this first poll's rolling. How are you feeling about your business right now? Are you optimistic? In survival mode? Let us know. So back to the housekeeping items. First, if you're comfortable with it, we've seen a couple people do this already. Let us know where you're dialing in from by dropping your location into the chat. We'd love to see where you're joining us for in our time together today. Secondly, we're going to have live Q&A near the end of this session, so please feel free to submit those questions for us at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to them all. Now, as you're answering these polls, I'd like to take a moment to recognize all the incredible support of our corporate partners. The work we do at the center wouldn't be possible without all the generosity and belief of our partners and funders, including Nasdaq, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Nareet Foundation, KKR, and BPM. We're deeply grateful for their partnership and hope you'll join us in sharing that appreciation too. All right, let's see where people are dialing in from. We've got Memphis, Tennessee, San Diego. Good morning. Times Square, New York. All right, love it. Nashville. We got a decent amount of Tennessee. North Carolina, Charlotte. All right, shout out to Charlotte. Huntsville, Alabama. Pittsburgh, PA. Love it. Well, thank you all. And this final poll, what's keeping you up at night, helps guide what we're going to be focusing on for you in the next coming months. So let us know. And it looks like finance is in the lead today. Awesome. Well, without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest today. We've got Hawwa Muhammad, who's the founder and CEO at Pink Trumpet. Hawwa, so nice to see you. I'm looking forward to this. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Colin. I am excited to be here. I'm going to get ready and share my slides to talk about a topic that I simply have built a career around. So give me just one moment. Here we go. And actually, I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay. Hopefully you all can see my slides and everything looks good.
Looks great.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin. So I am really excited to talk to you all about this topic, and it's really centered on how you, as you're building your businesses, can also build systems that reflect your values. And I'm excited about this topic because most of the time when people hear the word systems, they think of some obscure back office thing, or most people probably just jump to the actual tool or platform or software, which I'll talk about later, but that's not really what a system is. Another reason why I'm excited to talk about this topic is because values is another word that also feels obscure. It feels like this warm thing that we know we need and we know we should build our business on, but how do we actually think about the action that that word should inspire, and how do we operationalize that? So, for me, even though this idea of systems and values feels obscure, because of my background, I look at this as an invitation to really dive deeper and talk about how to share or how to talk about how systems can be designed, and how systems can actually integrate the values that you have. And so that is really what I hope to make very tangible today. And I figured what better way to kick off this conversation than to give you an example of probably one of the more values-driven bosses that we've seen, Michael Scott, right? He genuinely believes Dunder Mifflin. If any of you are Office fans, sorry, here we go. He genuinely believes that Dunder Mifflin is a family. As you can see, he has a mug, World's Best Boss, which, by the way, we know he bought himself. But if you listen to Michael Scott, he talks a lot about things like loyalty and, values that we hear often. But when you think about actual systems, we know that they are non-existent, right? He has a diversity training that ends in an HR complaint. His conflict resolution strategy is to lock two employees in a conference room. And his idea of employee development is an improv class, right? So values are there, but the operational follow-through is not. And the reason why this is a relevant example is because I have also worked with many other companies and organizations where there is a gap between what they say and the value. There's a gap between the value that they say and the operationalization of that value. So, on this topic of values, I would love to turn it over to you all, and feel free to drop this in the chat. But what is a core value that your business leads with? And this is a question, you don't have to overthink it, but I would like for you to hold on to that word. And by the end of this session, what I want to make sure I do is give you all a framework for thinking about how to make sure that value does not just sit on your website or in your strategic plan. I see some coming in. These are great: authenticity and transparency, accountability and integrity, user agency and privacy, trust and quality. Tracy says integrity. Clarity and alignment, Nimi. These are really, really great. Thank you. Thank you for dropping these. Okay. So before we get into this presentation, I want to give you a little bit of context about who I am. So I started Pink Trumpet, which is a company that I established in 2015 because I saw a gap around operations in the nonprofit sector. I have been working in the nonprofit sector formally since 2009. So I spent about 10 years formally working in nonprofits. And what I realized is nonprofits are not short on ideas. It's really the execution or implementation of those ideas. That's where things fall short. And so part of the mission of Pink Trumpet really became to serve as that project management arm for socially driven and mission-driven organizations. And I am very excited to share that since going full-time in my business, I have been able to work on projects that range from helping cities launch guaranteed income pilot programs. I have worked with foundations to help them execute their grant making strategy, all with the intention, of course, of baking their values into that process. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've done and where I've been in my career. So in order to be someone who can talk fluidly about workflows. Um, a lot of experiences helped me get to that place, right? I worked as an administrative assistant at the start of my career, where I really saw how different consulting frameworks can reveal certain bottlenecks. And then I transitioned to work at a charter school in Newark, New Jersey, which is where I'm based. And that experience was really helpful in helping me see how um, student resources and the ability to get students what they need really hinges on having a clear process or clear processes, I should say, for teachers and for parents. And so at Link, I worked in the finance and operations department. Then I found myself working at a really great nonprofit organization. They're all great, but Posse was very unique in that it was my first national nonprofit organization. And I worked in an operational capacity. So I really got to see how the fellowship selection process and the workflows around the fellowship selection process were really important to shaping who got certain opportunities and how those opportunities were communicated. Then I transitioned to work at a foundation where I really saw um, at a panoramic level or view how grant making and compliance was critical to getting money out the door. And that experience is what I also brought to one of the last stops I had in my career at the Clara Lionel Foundation. And that experience was also really critical in helping me figure out how crisis funding workflows can really mean the difference between getting money out the door really quickly or having money just sit. And so all of the places where I have worked has really reinforced a core truth, which is that it's one thing to have a vision, but that alone is not enough. You need to make sure that you have the proper workflows or systems in order to get resources to the right people at the right time. And so all of these experiences just helped me use a different lens for learning that really important lesson. So, my hope for today is that you'll accomplish these three things. The first is that you will learn how to align your internal operations with your values. And I wanted to provide three different pillars for doing that. We're going to talk about what that looks like when it comes to talent, capital, and culture. And then the next thing I want you to walk away with is a sense of how you can build workflows, policies, and practices that reflect your values. And then lastly, I want to make sure, or I hope that you understand how your internal systems shape the external experience, right? Because even though we're going to be talking about what this means for your business, I also hope that you see how this translates externally. So, most founders stop at values. Now, earlier you dropped in the chat some of the values that you have for your business. And what I have tended to see in my career is that people are people mean well, right? They name their values, they put it in their pitch deck, and maybe it's in your onboarding document, it's in different places. But most founders, they get busy, right? You all are busy putting out fires. And so not everyone has time to piece together how that value actually shows up in the day to day and how you operate your business. And that is where the gap happens. And it's not because founders don't care, it's really because time is limited and your time is precious, and not every founder has the time to connect those dots. Now, the other thing I want to mention here is there is a line that I like and I want to share with you all, and it's that culture is not what you say, it's what you tolerate, right? So let's say that you have the value of transparency, which some of you dropped in the chat. But maybe your team finds out about big decisions, not from you, but maybe online or from someone else, right? And so that is an example of how that system has not caught up to that value. And so this is a framework that I also want us to start with, right? So we have the values, which is what you believe. Then we have the behavior, which is what someone would actually see if that value were real. Then we have the system, which is the process, policy, or workflow that makes that behavior happen without you. Earlier, I talked about how sometimes when we talk about systems, people think it's the tool, it's the Trello, it's the project management system. But the system is actually, and I just want to reiterate, the process, policy, or workflow that makes the behavior happen without you. And that's really important, which we will talk about, and I will show you what I mean. So let's focus on making this a little bit more concrete. And so I'm going to use the capital example. So earlier I talked about how there's talent. We're going to look at this through different lens, the talent, capital, and culture. So let's start with capital, which is looking at how you spend, who you pay, and on what terms. So if your value is equity, what is an example of something someone would actually see? So I put in a sample behavior here, right? And that behavior could be that vendors get paid in 5 business days and not 60, regardless of their size. Now we're going to look at another example. So let's say you value community. So the question becomes, what is the behavior? What would someone actually see as a reflection of that value? So they could see you choosing to prioritize local vendors over national chains, right? That's an example of community because community isn't just who you serve, it's who you decide to resource. So these are some examples of what the flow looks like when you ask yourself how to take a value and turn that into something someone can actually see. So, why does all of this matter? When we talk about the importance of making sure that your values are baked into systems, there are 3 that I want to highlight. The first is retention. And we can look at retention from an employee standpoint, right? People stay when the culture that you talk about matches the pitch, right? And so when your systems reflect your values, that pitch actually becomes a reality. And that is what makes people stay. When I think about this in the context of my business, I think about not just um, the talent, I also think about the clients that I serve and work with. And that may be true for some of you as well. The other reason why this is important is revenue. And maybe that's probably what I should have led with, but revenue is really how you build your reputation. How you spend says everything. Vendors talk, partners notice, when you do things like pay on time, when you resource the right people, that reputation travels. Scale is the last thing that I want to highlight in terms of why this matters. So I know a lot of people talk about how you can't scale without systems, and that's true. But I think when you really break that down, systems, the only way to grow without breaking is to build a way of working or build habits that actually carry those values forward. That is really what enables you to scale. So all of this matters because it allows you to retain the right people. It allows you to build a strong reputation, and with that reputation, generate more revenue, and it allows you to build up. So this is a framework that I call a value, not my, but it can be your values operating system. So I talked about talent, capital, and culture. Those are really the pillars that I use to help think about how to design systems. So talent. talent is really looking at the people side. So it's not just who you hire, though, it's also looking at the full life cycle. How do you bring people in and how do you walk people out? Next, we have capital. So capital is looking at everything on the money side. It's how you spend, it's who you pay, it's what you decide to fund and how you price. So in my experience, I have also seen that a lot of what people say and do, there tends to be a lot of discrepancy, especially when it comes to capital, right? And so we talk about equity as an example, but if you're paying vendors, one vendor within 60 days, another vendor within 5 days, there's already a different story or mismatch of values and how they're operationalized there. Then we have culture, which I really look at as more of the connective tissue. It's how you communicate, it's how you meet, how you make decisions, and how you learn about what's working and what's not. And so for me, culture is the thing that reinforces your values, hopefully, and not undermine them. And one thing I want to call out on this slide is that every bullet that you see here, it represents a system, right? Every system is a decision that you get to make and hopefully feel excited about making. So I wanted to make this a little personal and I want to talk through where and how my values show up. So underneath the talent pillar, for me, what I think about is how do I find and vet contractors? How do I onboard team members? And how do I give feedback and exit gracefully? These are just some examples of questions that I ask to help me design systems where my values can show up. Underneath the capital pillar, I tend to think about, okay, how fast do I pay my vendors? As someone who has been on the other side, I am very sensitive about this particular question. The next question that I consider and ask myself is, how do I price my services? Am I pricing it in a way that actually reflects my values? And then I ask, how do I spend my money? As someone who also works with many nonprofits, I tend to prioritize spending money with mission-driven organizations. Now, when it comes to culture, this is probably the biggest bucket for me at this current moment. Transparently, I am also auditing my business. And so this is also a very timely presentation for me to give, but I am also trying to revamp my onboarding process and how I create culture in my business. And so that leads me to ask questions like, how am I communicating with clients? How am I sharing knowledge as a company? How am I running internal meetings? How do I choose who I want to work with? And how do I close client engagements? So this is really how I'm thinking about showing up for my business and how I'm thinking about making sure my values are part of that process. So I talked through the values or set of questions that I ask around those three pillars. I want to get a little bit more granular and I want to talk through my company's values. And I want to use this as an example to show you how I operationalize or create systems around these values. So the first value that you see on the screen here is simplify the hard stuff, right? I work with many nonprofits, but I've also worked in the nonprofit sector for close to 15 years. And one of the reasons why I made this a value is because sometimes things can be so unnecessarily obscure, whether it's how to apply for a grant or where to look for funding. And as a company, I really wanted to embrace this idea of simplifying the hard stuff by using simple language and making things clear. The next value that I have as a company is discomfort can lead to breakthroughs, right? And so that is really centered on the idea that sometimes uncomfortable conversations can actually unlock really important things, really important values, or really important ways of thinking that even though how we got there might have been, I don't want to say ridden, but may have been bumpy, it's important not to avoid that. The next value that I have is lead with empathy and with results. Transparently, I might change how that's worded, but the main idea behind this value is that I really think it's important to combine empathy with outcomes. Again, working in the nonprofit sector and serving nonprofits, there's a lot of empathy for the stories that we hear and the work that's being done, but it's really important to make sure that that is actionable. And so that is where that sits in that value. And then the last value, embrace accountability. It makes us stronger. I saw a lot of you also drop accountability as your value. Oh, sorry about that. And for me, where that comes from is knowing that trust is built through accountability, right? It's you showing up, it's you delivering on the things that you say you're going to do. And ultimately, with these values, I talked about this earlier, right? They sit on my website, but it's not enough to just have them sit on my website, or it's not enough for me to just tell you these are my values. Next, we're going to take a look at what that looks like in practice. So I want to give you an example of how I operationalize that. And I also want to preface this by saying, I love talking about this topic, but I recognize that sometimes it can feel very abstract. It can feel a little heady. And so my hope is that as you think through any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but also I want to make sure that I address them and hold myself accountable to addressing them at the end of the session. So I just want to pause and give that little disclaimer and then jump right back into what putting one of my values looks like in practice. So the value that I chose is simplify the hard stuff. And the pillar that I chose to examine is talent. And I broke that down even further by assigning a function, that function being hiring. So what does that behavior actually look like? For every new contractor, they get a very clear jargon-free onboarding experience. So what I have done is I've actually put together a revised onboarding deck for new contractors that really highlights and walks them through the mission, the vision, and then an overview of some of the projects that I've done and what they are stepping into. I try to make sure that I run any text related to the onboarding experience through Hemingway to just make sure that I am not speaking to someone at a 12th grade level. I try to keep it to 8th grade, easy to understand in terms of the behavior. The other behavior is just making sure that the hiring process is transparent and predictable. So what does that mean? I am very clear in the actual job experience of how long the hiring process will take and what the steps actually are. Then the last behavior that I want to highlight on this screen is I really try to make sure that the offboarding process for contractors is graceful. What do I mean by that? So in addition to having an exit interview, and I know some of you may be thinking, yeah, but these are not part or full-time, employees. I do try to treat contractors as people who are part of my team. And so what that means is I want to design a process that makes you feel like you are proud to work with Pink Trumpet. And part of that is creating an offboarding process that invites them to do an exit interview, and to also use that exit interview as an opportunity to share feedback. And then one other thing I'll mention in terms of the behavior, which I've featured this on one of the slides that you'll see, is as part of my onboarding process, I like to collect details about the contractor that I work with through an Airtable form. And so those details range from things like, your birthday, month and day. Not everyone wants to give the year. And then, other things that allow me to create reminders and point other. So I collect details that allow me to build in communication touch points. So as part of that offboarding process, I bring that up because, even though I am saying goodbye to them in that moment, there's still another touch point that I'll have, whether it's a birthday or another milestone that I have collected. So that's the behavior. Now, in terms of the system, what that tends to look like is I use Monday.com as my project management tool. And so I have an onboarding checklist template that lives in there and that I visit every time I am about to onboard a new contractor. I'm still figuring out how to automate parts of that and to be very transparent. As part of what I am learning is not everything is helpful to automate. So I just want to put that out there. The other system that reinforces the behaviors that I have spoken to is having a set of standard interview questions. Right now, this lives in my Notion space. I don't think it's going to sit there forever, but having interview questions that are tied to the values also helps me well, I should say, is helping me to create a stronger rubric for the people that I bring on. And then the other system that I have is an exit feedback form. In addition to, um, I give people the option to either complete the exit feedback form or do that verbally or via video. And then what that also tends to look like in terms of the offboarding process is having specifically for clients. I know I mentioned contractors earlier, but for clients, I send in my Airtable, I have a checkbox. So once a client is no longer a client, what that will activate is sending them a thank you email that will have a series of ways to stay engaged, an invitation to do things like write a LinkedIn review or write a review for me, make referrals, and things of that nature. So lots of things that I named in terms of systems, but the system I want to also add only comes after the behavior is in place or after I've identified the right behavior, if that makes any sense. Um, so now what I want to do is I want us to zoom in just a little bit more. I know that earlier in the previous slide, we talked a little bit about the value and the behavior, and you saw the systems that I have, specifically around talent. So I want to zoom in and actually show you what that onboarding workflow looks like. And we're going to move from the contractor lens to the client lens. And so the value that I am sticking with is simplifying the hard stuff. And again, that behavior similar to the contractor, but the behavior for the client is that the client will experience a very clear onboarding process. Now, I have chosen to use this framework to help me map that out. And so the M in map stands for making it official. So that helps me think about the phase for the client. That's the contracting, legal, and commitment phase, right? And so what happens as far as a workflow is the contract is signed in DocuSign. Now, what that looks like is I mentioned that I use Airtable, and I have a box that I check off in Airtable once that contract is signed. So once I check off that box in Airtable, that sends an automated email to the client, which I will share a preview, I will share a snapshot of. But that emails is a welcome message. It provides my W-9 to that client. It's an invitation to schedule a kickoff meeting, and it has my how we work one pager, right? So that's how I think about the operationalization of that simplifying the hard stuff values when it comes to that phase. I want my client to have a clear sense of how we're going to work together. And I put all of that in an email once the contract is signed. Then the next phase I call align the workspace. So still we're using that MAP um, acronym here. So aligning the workspace is really about how I set them up for success. And so I use Monday.com, and transparently, I'm also exploring transitioning, not transitioning, but creating a client portal that will still rely on Monday.com, but it will feed information from Monday.com into the client portal. My experience has been not a lot of clients will care to go back into Monday.com. So when I align the workspace, though, I try to think about um, how do I create a central place where the client sees everything and is privy to all of the things happening in relation to us fulfilling the project. And so what tends to happen is once the contract is signed, I create a project workspace in Monday.com using one of the templates that I have for clients. And then the other great thing that happens is a Google Drive folder is automatically created once that contract is signed that the client will have access to. So P, process and close. So this relates to things like payment processes and processes associated with the offboarding of that client. So I tend to do things at least 2 weeks in. I'm actually considering removing this automation, but what I tend, because I meet so frequently with some of my clients, and so what that had looked like before was 14 days in, sending an automated email asking, how's it going? So now at the end of the project, one process that I have integrated that speaks to the value of simplifying the hard stuff is um, once a project ends, providing a thank you email that also outlines what we've accomplished, and then attaching a link to the exit feedback form. And so that is how I think about operationalizing my values when it comes to creating a very clear experience for the clients that I work with. And the other thing I will say about this slide is that, it took me a while to get here, and I am also still refining it. The nature of a service-based business, when you work with so many different kinds of projects in my case is that I also can't be too rigid or inflexible, which is why I shared earlier, I'm actually experimenting with less automations because every case is different. However, there are a set of some automations that I like to keep, but for the most part, I it took me a while to get here, and I'm still refining this. That's what I want to emphasize. Now, this is probably my favorite slide because I think that earlier I talked about how oftentimes when there are presentations or when people talk about how to create systems or how to, in my case, make sure your values are integrated in those systems, we don't always get that sneak peek into the back end or what things actually look like. So I try to give you snapshots of what some of that looks like on my back end. So as an example, what you see here on the left, on my left-hand side is a new client intake form. So when I sign a contract, I like to actually start to fill out pieces of the client intake form. And what I have here are some of the pieces that I fill out. Now, I can't fill out everything. So things like birthday, birth month, client address, those are the things that I want to make sure they fill out. So I do some of the heavy lifting because, I mentioned that I'm refining this process. And one of the learnings that I had was not everybody has time or wants to fill out these forms. They mean well, but things can slip through the cracks. So to make things easier, I do some of that heavy lifting and ask them to fill out a pre-filled form. Now, I mentioned the birthday automation. So I'm also still experimenting with what that can look like. But right now, I collect my client birthdays so that at least once a year they get a different kind of communication from me that lets them know, hey, haven't forgotten about you. Collecting their address, I wasn't able to do that, to do what I'm about to share this past calendar year, but collecting their address allows me to ship end of year goodies to my client. So that is something that I think is important to collect. You probably can't see this in the screen. It looks really small on my screen, but on my right hand side, I also took another snapshot of this is the form that clients will get or vendors saying, here are the next steps of the process. Once they have signed a contract with me, I mentioned earlier, I make sure in the case with my clients, they get my W-9. But this is what that workflow would look like as far as the automation in Airtable. And this, I also want to say, um, has been a labor of love in many ways. I have a team that helps me operationalize and build these things out. But I enjoy, again, I enjoy the build, but I enjoy thinking about how do I make sure the things I value are part of what I collect or part of, in this case, the onboarding process. So now that I'm kind of walking you through, or walking, now that I've walked you through some of the granular pieces, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because the other important part of this process, we talk about creating systems. We talk about what that looks like when you actually build it out, but it's also important to codify it, to write it down. And there is value in making sure that you are creating standard operating procedures or you're just writing down policies. It becomes a way to remind yourself of why you do things the way you do them. And it's not just a reminder for you, it becomes a reminder for the people who you then delegate those pieces to. So here is how I like to think about it within that framework that I shared, the talent, capital, and culture, right? So we know a policy is a decision that you hopefully have to make only once. And once you decide it, you document it. And so for the talent pillar, what that looks like is making sure that onboarding documents are written at that eighth grade reading level. So if a contractor who is helping me with the onboarding workflow cannot follow it, then it's really an invitation for me to say, okay, how do I rewrite this? Versus how come this person is not getting it, you know? When we look at capital, capital is, I mentioned it earlier, but it's writing down policies and baking it into my contract that say, hey, you are signing a contract with Pink Trumpet. Know that Pink Trumpet is going to pay you within 10 business days. So that becomes part of how I turn the values that I have into policies or standard operating procedures that make sure that I don't have to um, go back and say, wait, what did I say again? Or how did we do that again? When it comes to culture, this is the one that I am putting a lot more time and energy into. But for right now, what that looks like is when clients get that email saying, here's the feedback in the exit form. Um, when I get that feedback, I should say, that's something that I tend to share with the team, ideally within 48 hours. Um, the other thing I will say about this policy is that one of the ways I'm working to operationalize it so that I'm not doing too much manual work is um, I am working on creating and building out almost like a client portal, but for my contractors. So I also love talking about that. I've explored using Notion for that. I'm exploring another tool called Softer. But what that would mean is that when clients send feedback and fill out that form, it becomes viewable in the one workspace for my contractors who've worked with me and supported me on that project. So that's how I tend to think about how to make sure that the things I value are written and codified in some way, shape, or form. Now, one of the last things that I wanted to impart on is, you know, we talked a lot about like what you build on the inside, but it's really important to know that what you are building on the inside, it really does shape what experience people have on the outside. And so I created this to show, for everything you build, whether it's a vendor form, I call it vendor vault form, that collects information about, vendor birthdays or where they're located or their address, what that sends, what signal that sends to your vendor is that you're organized, and that tends to make them feel, at least some feedback that I have gotten is, wow, I feel almost respected. Like I feel so honored. Like you're asking me for these things and you're giving me a form with information that is already filled out, right? So that's part of what they experience and say on the outside. That net 10 payment policy, vendors will tell people, yes, they are so great to work with. They pay on time. As someone who, again, has been on the other side, Um, it's really great to hear people who I've hired say, yeah, one of the reviews I had was like, this person pays on time. So things like that go a long way in terms of building your reputation. The onboarding checklist, what you build on the inside, it really helps contractors feel aligned, and it helps them feel like they can be dependable because they have systems and tools to help them do their job better. And then the last thing I referenced on this slide is the feedback form that I ask my clients to complete at the end of an engagement. And what that tends to look like is hopefully clients can see that um, if there are challenges or things that they encountered, um, their ability to share that in the feedback form lets them know that I am responsive as a company. And I also tend to follow up with clients when I do get feedback to also make sure that we are aligned on me understanding um, their feedback and yeah, just ways that I can improve that in the future. So that is how I really just want to make sure um, I leave you all with a sense of what having systems on the inside can actually mean externally. So, if any of this presentation resonated with you, and you are thinking, I would like to talk to her more about what this might mean for my business, I have opened up specifically for people on today's call, something called the Clarity Sprint. So it's a free 45-minute one-on-one call where you bring whatever you are stuck with, whether it is how to operationalize one of the values that you have named earlier in the chat today. But it's really a way for me to connect with you and honestly geek out more and build systems around how to do this for your business. Um, so that is the end of this presentation. I know that we started with the Michael Scott analogy, but I do want to bring us back to that and just say, he's someone who meant well, but didn't have the right systems to back it up. And follow through is so important, but the goal is not always to be perfect. It's not to be perfect with the build and with the follow through. I think it's really important to make sure that you at least start small and commit to improving. I think that that is the fast track to building systems. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back over to Colin.
Awesome. Hawwa. What a great job. This is great. So generous. Love this. Needed this. It's an awesome job, Hawwa. We only have 5 minutes, but I'm going to try to lightning round as many of these questions as possible. Sound good?
Yes.
Awesome. Is it easier to have 4 or 5 specific questions for everyone for reviews slash feedback?
Sorry, okay, say that one more time.
All good. Is it easier to have 4 or 5 specific questions for everyone for reviews, for feedback?
Yeah, I would even say yes, the fewer the better. So for my client on my client intake form, not client intake form, for my client exit feedback form, I think I probably have like 3 questions to be very honest. So yeah, I encourage fewer just because everyone is so short on time.
Yeah, the shorter the list, the more likely I'm gonna respond to it faster.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the most accepted way to reach out to a client to provide a review feedback? Email, text, etc.
It depends on the client, but I have generally found that email tends to be good, especially like right after that final invoice. You just want to remind them almost like, here's the list of things that I'm going to close access to, and you want to make sure that in that email you can give them a space to share feedback. I also try and incentivize clients sometimes and say like, hey, I will take off 5% of the final invoice, or that's the main one I have for now. So more to come on that, but yeah.
Awesome. Is it better to outsource the efficiency of systems or do it yourself for more hands-on?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would say don't outsource the system until you understand the workflow. That is so, so important. Yeah.
Awesome. Rolling right along. How are you using AI in your workflow? Suggestions and ideas to leverage it for incorporating our values into the automated behaviors?
Yeah, this is a good question. I use it mainly as a brainstorming partner. So I use it as a way to say, as an example, hey, right now, in terms of thanking my clients or, making my clients feel appreciated, I have a birthday automation and I send gifts at the end of the year. Is there anything else that might make me stand out or might make the process more, so I feed AI prompts that help me build out better workflows.
Awesome. Love that. Thought partner. Did you list out each of your values on a separate process sheet or list them out with paragraph on each on one form?
Um, I list them out separately. Um, yeah, but I'm not sure if that answers your question. Hope.
I don't know if I understood it either, but yeah, it's tough with the internet environment. Um, but yes, I think you answered it. Oh well, we are almost at time. Hawwa, thank you so much for joining. Everyone in the chat is real excited and thankful and grateful for your time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And I love talking about this. So, yes, um, thank you all for your time and would love to work with anyone who wants to talk more.
Great. Well, we'll follow up with your contact information, all of the things after this. But thank you again. And for everyone who's still on, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you found value. And we've got a bunch of webinars coming up on the horizon. So take a look at those in the chat, in the follow-up email, and on our website. But until the next time we see you, hope you have a great day. And we will welcome you back online soon. Thanks again, everyone.